The sky over Okinawa was heavy with smoke in the spring of 1945. Naval gunfire thundered offshore as shells arced toward the island, hammering cliffs and ridges until the earth itself shook. On the beaches, waves of American troops stormed ashore, weapons held tight against the surf, their boots sinking into sand churned black by bombardment. Behind them stretched the largest amphibious force of the Pacific War. Ahead lay an island bristling with fortifications, its caves and ridges hiding a Japanese defense prepared to fight to the last. The Battle of Okinawa was not just another island in the long march across the Pacific. It was the last, the bloodiest, and the most haunting, a battle that would foreshadow the unthinkable end to the war. The Allied command had chosen Okinawa for its strategic value. Located just 340 miles from Japan's southernmost islands, it was the perfect staging ground for the planned invasion of the Japanese mainland. Control of Okinawa would allow American bombers and naval forces to strike directly at the heart of Japan. For the Japanese, it was the final barrier, the line that had to hold. They poured nearly 100,000 troops into the island, commanded by General Mitsuru Ushijima, and prepared a defense that would make every cave, ridge, and village a fortress. Okinawa was not just a battlefield. It was home to hundreds of thousands of civilians who would find themselves trapped in the crossfire. The invasion began on April 1st, 1945, Easter Sunday, when more than 180,000 American soldiers and Marines landed on Okinawa's western shores. To their surprise, the beaches were lightly defended. Soldiers braced for machine gun fire that never came, pushing inland quickly. It seemed almost easy, but the silence was deceptive. The Japanese had withdrawn to the island's southern ridges, where they had spent months constructing elaborate defenses. Miles of tunnels, underground bunkers, and camouflaged artillery positions. It was here, in places like Shuri Ridge, Sugarloaf Hill, and the Maida Escarpment, that the real battle would be fought. As American forces advanced southward, the skies above became a second battlefield. Waves of Japanese kamikaze pilots hurled their planes at the Allied fleet, turning the seas into fields of fire. Pilots, many barely out of training, flew with the rising sun painted on their wings and farewell letters in their cockpits. Their planes carried explosives and fuel enough to turn each crash into an inferno. The fleet endured relentless assaults, hundreds of kamikaze sorties that sank dozens of ships and damaged hundreds more. Sailors scanned the skies day and night, knowing that at any moment a plane could dive from the clouds and turn their deck into an inferno. For many survivors, the horror of Okinawa was not the land battle, but the sudden, screaming descent of a kamikaze. On land, progress slowed to a crawl. The Japanese defensive strategy was designed to bleed the Americans, not repel them outright. Soldiers advancing toward the southern ridges encountered interlocking fields of fire, sniper positions concealed in caves, and artillery hidden in the hills. Every advance was met with sudden bursts of machine gun fire or mortars falling from unseen positions. To take one ridge often meant days of combat, measured in yards gained and lives lost. American troops used flamethrowers and demolitions to root defenders out of caves, turning them into tombs of fire and smoke. The air reeked of burning fuel, scorched earth, and death. The battle took a terrible toll on civilians. Okinawan families fled their villages, carrying what little they could, only to find themselves trapped between advancing American forces and entrenched Japanese defenders. Some were forced into caves alongside soldiers, used as human shields. Others were coerced into mass suicides, driven by propaganda that painted the Americans as monsters who would slaughter them without mercy. Mothers killed their children to spare them imagined horrors. Entire families leapt from cliffs into the sea. The cries of civilians mixed with the roar of battle, a haunting reminder that this was not just a clash of armies but a tragedy for an entire people. Through April and May, the fighting intensified. Shuri Castle, an ancient seat of Okinawan kings, became the centerpiece of the Japanese defense. Its underground tunnels and fortified walls turned it into a bastion, but by late May, relentless bombardment forced the Japanese to retreat further south. American forces advanced at staggering cost. At Sugarloaf Hill, Marines fought for weeks in brutal close combat, storming the same slopes again and again under heavy fire. At Maida Escarpment, soldiers used grappling hooks and ladders to climb cliffs, while under machine gun and mortar fire. For every cave captured, more defenders waited in the next ridge. By June, the Japanese position was collapsing. General Ushijima, unwilling to surrender, prepared his men for a final stand. On June 21st, he committed ritual suicide rather than be captured, leaving behind a note praising his troops' sacrifice. The organized resistance ended, but scattered fighting and pockets of resistance continued for days. The island was finally declared secure on June 22nd, after nearly 3 months of unrelenting combat. The cost of Okinawa was staggering. More than 12,000 American soldiers, sailors, and Marines were dead, with over 50,000 wounded. Japanese military losses exceeded 100,000. The civilian toll was perhaps the most horrific. Estimates suggest between 100,000 and 150,000 Okinawan civilians perished, nearly a third of the island's population. The beaches, hills, and villages were left littered with bodies. Survivors described the island as a place where the stench of death clung to the air long after the guns fell silent. For the Allies, Okinawa was both a victory and a warning. The ferocity of Japanese resistance and the willingness of civilians to die rather than surrender convinced American leaders that an invasion of the Japanese mainland would be catastrophic, with casualties potentially reaching into the millions. It was in the aftermath of Okinawa that the decision to use atomic bombs took shape. The battle foreshadowed the unthinkable, the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, by demonstrating what Japan was willing to endure to avoid defeat. Okinawa remains one of the most brutal battles of the Second World War, remembered for its scale, its savagery, and its human cost. The caves where soldiers and civilians hid, the cliffs where families leapt, the beaches where men stormed under fire, all are silent now, but the memory lingers. The last battle of the Pacific was not only a military campaign, but a tragedy etched into the lives of everyone who touched that island, whether by choice or by fate. It was a glimpse of what could have been if the war had reached the Japanese mainland, and it left a scar on history that endures to this day. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.